Welcome everyone to KAUST Sci-Cafe. My name is Naadiya Carrim and I'm Research Engagement Manager here at KAUST. And this event is brought to you by the Office of the Vice President for Research. I'd like to start by saying Happy St. Patrick's Day to my fellow Irish who are listening. I guess that's the beauty of KAUST. So we have over 110 nationalities here. We are definitely a very diverse community, almost as diverse as the Red Sea, or perhaps not. Which brings us to our topic today, Red Sea exploration. And for those of you that don't know, KAUST is situated on the coast of the Red Sea. It's almost like our back garden here. So I'm joined today by three panelists who have a lot of knowledge of the Red Sea. Francesca, Daniele, and Lloyd, you are all very welcome to the KAUST Sci-Cafe. Francesca, if you would start us off and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Nadia, Lloyd, and Daniele. Thank you. Yes, my name is Francesca Benzoni. I am a marine biologist, and I am specialized in the study of diversity and distribution of corals, the same organisms that build coral reefs in the Red Sea and elsewhere around the world in tropical regions. My exploration of the seas around Arabia started more than 2 decades ago now for my master's degree. And ever since, I came back in different capacities because this part of the world, and the Red Sea in particular, is just unique and there's so much to study and explore.
Amazing. Thank you, Francesca. Daniele, if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you. And good afternoon to everybody. I am Daniele Daffonchio. I am here at KAUST since 7 years, working on microbiology. My specialization is microbiology with focus on microbial ecology, and in particular, I love to look to extreme environments, so including those in the sea, in the deep sea.
Sorry, I had an issue unmuting myself. Thank you, Daniele. And Lloyd, over to you. I think you have quite a unique position here, as Francesca and Daniele are both professors, but tell us what you do at KAUST.
Yeah, thanks, Nadia, and hello, everybody. My name is Lloyd Smith. I've been at KAUST for 12 years, since the beginning, we'll say. And I was hired originally as a support engineer for marine electronics. So I'm a Canadian electrical engineer by training. But for the last 4 years, I've been working as the lab director for the Coastal and Marine Resources Core Laboratory. This is a laboratory at KAUST that supports marine science. We support marine science with both the marine electronics, like I originally started supporting, but also in marine operations, small and research vessel operations, scientific diving, as well as aquarium support for culturing the live organisms that Francesca and Daniele like to collect when they're on field work in the Red Sea.
Okay, amazing. I can't wait to hear a little bit more about that later. Okay, Francesca, you said that you've explored the Arabian Peninsula. Tell us a little bit more about that, but with particular emphasis on the Red Sea.
Yes, so it's more the seas around Arabia. So the Arabian Peninsula is bordered by different bodies of water that in a relatively short span cover very different environmental conditions. And they're all interesting, but the Red Sea is really unique. It's where you find from the shallow to the deep and from the north to the south, a unique set of geological, oceanographical and biological conditions that make it really a very, very interesting case study for many, many aspects of marine science. Of course, for me in particular, it was about reef corals and their distribution and diversity. And by comparing the Red Sea to the rest of the Indo-Pacific, we were actually able to better highlight the uniqueness of the Red Sea coral fauna. So yes, I started my master's in Yemen in 1998, and then came back to the Red Sea for consultancy in Jordan and Egypt. And in 2013, I was eventually involved in the series of biodiversity expeditions that the Red Sea Research Center and Michael Berryman were organizing. And so I started collaborating with KAUST colleagues. And the more I saw about the Arabian Red Sea, and the more I realized that, the more you explore, the more you find really around here.
Absolutely. my goodness, you were in Yemen in 1998. I'd say that was super interesting. Daniele, what makes an environment extreme? You did mention that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Of course, we use commonly the word extreme to define those environments that are far away from the condition we are used to. But I would prefer in general to call them as unconventional environments because by definition, these extreme environments are not extreme for those that are living there. However, if we want to go to look to the conditions, the environmental conditions that are present in these systems, they are unique in terms of temperature, salinity, water stress, hydrostatic pressure in the case of the deep sea, and all these combinations make the systems very harsh. And they can challenge the limits of life because when you have the combination of this multiple stressful factor, at the same time, you can really go close or even go beyond the limits of life. Now, to my knowledge, there are some places where it has been shown that there is no life on the planet that are very close to the Red Sea, are in the Dalol, that are in the Eritrea Depression, that is a continuation of the Rift Valley that initiate in Africa. And the same is for the Red Sea, because in the deep sea, there are certain positions, especially where there are the brine pools, where the conditions are really, really extreme. So let's say non-conventional, because for the organisms living there, they are their environment. They cannot live in our condition.
So the definition of extreme comes from us: high in salt, low in nutrients, perhaps different pH to what we're used to as well. Okay, very cool. So then, Lloyd, how does the Coastal Marines operations at KAUST, how do we support professors like Francesca and Daniele?
Thanks, Nadia. I just want to make a comment about what Daniele was referring to with extreme environments. Extreme environments are from your point of view, right? So the microbes may love life down there, but people and equipment certainly do not. So I mean, most of what we do, if you really want to boil it down to the bare basics, is to provide the support to explore those unique, challenging environments. Just to put it in perspective, at the deepest part of the Red Sea, it's nearly 3,000 meters in depth. 3,000 meters in depth. How do you even visualize that, right? I know Americans like to talk about football fields, but I think soccer pitches are about the same length, and that's quite a bit longer than a hockey rink. But anyway, we'll talk about football pitches. It's about 30 football pitches in depth at the deepest place. And in the most challenging locations, the brine pools that Daniele is referring to, one in particular, the Atlantis 2 Deep, it's 70 degrees Celsius nearly in there. And it's the salt content, the salinity is 25% salt, whereas in the normal ocean, it's 4% or less. So any piece of equipment you put into that environment has to be hardened, has to be designed specifically for it, and you don't just buy it at a shop. So at the Coastal and Marine Resources Core Laboratory, what we do is come up with solutions to bringing our people and our equipment into those environments so that we can successfully sample them and measure what's going on there.
Excellent, thank you. And I love how, as a Canadian, you managed to get the hockey rink reference in there with your hockey stick in your background as well. That's brilliant. So I guess my next question then would be, why is the Red Sea so diverse? I mean, we've talked about it being high in salt and low in nutrients and this extreme environment, but perhaps Francesca, if you could tell us a little bit more about why the Red Sea is so diverse as a sea in the world.
In terms of biological diversity, let's say we need to look at different factors really, and a co-occurrence of these factors has shaped the diversity of the Red Sea and its uniqueness. So let's start with the container. Okay, the geology of the Red Sea is really unique. Our fellow geologists say that the Red Sea is a young ocean in formation because it's really opening up. So as Lloyd mentioned, it's in its maximum point, 3 kilometers deep. That's not the deepest that you can find around, but it's still providing a very long water column. But it's actually bordered by also fossil reefs, fossil rocks. This body of water is quite narrow, extends from north to south, but it's also peripheral to the much larger Indo-Pacific region, to which it's connected only through a very small passage in the south. That's a Bab el-Mandeb. Of course, there is a man-made passage in the north, in the Gulf of Suez, but that's a different story. So the water, as you mentioned, is higher in temperature, higher in salinity. It's lower in nutrients. And it's also, there is also a different factor that, kind of drives the diversity of the Red Sea. And it's really the isolation and the lack of, or, limitation of connectivity with the rest of the adjacent bodies of water. So all these different factors have led to a kind of push towards evolving adaptations towards this unique environment. And it's not by surprise that we actually have one of the highest rates of endemism. So endemism is when a species is an endemic when it's only found in a certain area. So an endemic of the Red Sea means a species that's only found in the Red Sea and nowhere else in the world. So there are a number of fish, coral, algae, invertebrates, vertebrate species that are exclusively found in the Red Sea. And so it's not just about the sheer number of species in the Red Sea, it's also about their uniqueness in terms of distribution.
Okay, that's mad. First of all, I didn't know the Red Sea was an ocean. That's something new that I've learned today. And yeah, that's really cool that you can only find, a certain type of marine life within the Red Sea and nowhere else in the world. That is amazing. Daniele, have you got anything to add to why is the Red Sea so diverse, for our listeners to get a better understanding of the Red Sea?
For starting from the consideration made by Francesca, I want just to mention some of these factors that make the difference, the environmental factors. Let's think to temperature in all the oceans, Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, the Atlantic, the Southern Ocean, and so on. If you go below 300, 500 meters, the temperature reach 3 degrees. So it's very low in the water. In the Mediterranean, in the deep of the Mediterranean, the temperature is 14 degrees. Here in the Red Sea is 22, between 21 and 22, even at 3,000 meters, 2,000 meters. So this means, and this is since, long time, millions of years. So this means that all the organisms that can thrive there are exposed to that temperature and are selected by that temperature. So the selection plays a major role in picking up that life forms that can be adapted genetically, that modify their genome due to the mutation rate and the evolution to cope with these conditions. And this is the reason of the endemism that make the endemism. Together with the isolation, let's say the Red Sea is like an island because it is isolated from the rest. If we want to make a comparison with the land ecosystem. Of course, it's not an island, it's a sea, but the input of water from the Indian Ocean are so small at the South Strait of Bab el-Mandeb that do not make and imply a continuous, a large connectivity with the rest of the oceans. This means that there is a lot of, selective pressure for the organisms to evolve in a different way. And this makes the uniqueness of the diversity of organisms in this system. And this is both for macroorganisms, fishes, to the corals, and the microbes as well. So we can find certain type of microbes that are really endemic and unique. And this is a treasure, you know, of new life forms that we can discover.
Great, thank you. So, okay, it's isolated, it's like an island, so therefore no rivers, no fresh water is running into the Red Sea, and it's even saltier then, right? I mean, it's quite salty, the Red Sea.
Yes, the Red Sea is the saltiest ocean on the planet. If we want to go to compare, there are another famous one that is the Dead Sea, that is very salty. It is much saltier than the Red Sea, but indeed at the end, it is not really an ocean because it is in the land. It's like a lake. So it is somehow isolated and do not communicate with the other oceans. So it's in fact an inland lake.
It's
While the Red
landlocked.
Sea, sorry, yes, landlocked. So the Red Sea is indeed at the end the saltiest ocean we have.
In the whole world.
Sorry?
In the
All
whole
the
world.
world, yes, definitely, in all the world, yes.
Oh, cool. And it's in our
And moreover,
backyard.
you're right. This salinity is due to the fact that there is no a real, complete, and extensive water circulation and communication with the other oceans, so dilution. And especially there is no rain and no rivers. So no freshwater input, so the dilution will not happen.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of rain here in Saudi. I know it's St. Patrick's Day, but in Ireland we get a lot of rain. I do miss that a bit when I live here in Saudi Arabia. Just a reminder to our audience, to our listeners, you know, you can submit your questions now. We can get to them later. So please do, you know, put your questions forward for our panelists today. I think it's a really, really exciting topic that we're talking about. So keeping on that, you know, how the Red Sea is so diverse, Lloyd, we have a research vessel here, a boat, essentially in KAUST, that has gone all the way up and down the coast of the Red Sea. Tell us a little bit more about that and, you know, maybe understanding how diverse the Red Sea actually is.
Sure. Well, the Red Sea is very diverse, so technical support for the Red Sea also has to be quite diverse. And we're talking a lot about biology here today, but we also support a lot of geology as well, you know, just basic mapping even at the bottom and looking at the at the formations that aren't visible from the surface that you can only see by using equipment that can be submerged down to those depths or using sensors that can see through the water. But yeah, so our support is quite diverse, right? We have research vessel Thule. We've been operating that vessel now since 2013. And, you know, it's a relatively small converted fishing vessel, but it was the first research vessel in Saudi Arabia. And we have gone from one end of Saudi Arabia to the other, coastal Red Sea, in that vessel, and really expanded our knowledge of the area because of having that boat here. Prior to owning our own vessel, we leased several vessels from other organizations. And of course, we wouldn't have them at our fingertips for the entire year. So it'd be a mad few months of research followed by, you know, months of writing papers and preparing for the next cruise. But now we can have continuous support for the large vessel fleet. We also, of course, you know, the Red Sea has a coastal environment, shallow, you know, reef systems right to abysmal depths. So we have a small boat fleet as well for supporting most of the diving trips. You know, we not only take researchers to the Red Sea, we also take the Red Sea to the researchers. So we operate an aquarium on the facility where we pull in roughly 3 million liters of water per day into a large number of research aquariums where the research can continue on land in a more controlled environment, and more bespoke research can be conducted in situ. We have in that aquarium, even, you can see the diversity of the types of research that we support. From deep sea corals that I know Fran is very excited about. We sampled, I think it must be 8 years ago now, with a remotely operated vehicle. We found some corals that had no business living where they were at 800 meters depth. They don't know what sunlight is. They are used to high pressure. The temperatures are wonky. And we've managed to keep them alive in a synthetic environment for 8 years, and not just alive, thriving and breeding and reproducing. But then in the other side of the lab, we have a just as successful breeding program for clownfish. It's a testament to the facility on the quality of the water and the systems to set up a breeding experiment of those little delicate reef fish.
Clownfish like Nemo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We found Nemo.
That's brilliant. And I guess like with the research vessel, it probably does an awful lot of mapping of the Red Sea as well, up and down that coast. Absolutely.
Basically, when the vessel leaves the dock, it's mapping. We're still operating on charts that were drawn up in the 1800s in the Red Sea. There's some of these charts that have depths that were literally measured with a string and a weight. Of super importance to everybody is to know what it really looks like down there. So when the boat's off the dock, it's mapping. We use an acoustic or a sound-based mapping system. Essentially sends out sound pulses. They bounce off the bottom. It comes back up, and based on that, we can draw a fairly accurate map of the bottom. So we actually mapped the Saudi side of the Gulf of Aqaba for the first time, and it exposed some amazing geological features up there in a very interesting area.
Excellent. And you said everybody wants to know what it looks like. What does the Red Sea look like, guys? You're saying it's really salty, but are the waters very clear? It's just a question that's going to come to me. I mean, full of coral reefs, full of coral bleaching. What does it look like?
Well, the depths, it looks like a desert. You go for a long time and you see very little. But then when you come upon something like one of the brine pools, it's just an amazing sight. It actually looks like an underwater lake with a whole ecosystem of its own that I couldn't even begin to understand how it all works. I know it's Daniele's area. But what you see first when you approach these lakes is bacterial mats, these white film on the sand. All of a sudden, it's looking a little different. There's something going on. And as closer to the brine pools you get, you start seeing more complex organisms. By the time you're on the brine pool, there are sea stars and sea urchins and sharks feeding on all of this, and it's alive.
Okay, that sounds pretty cool. And I guess, only a few people get to dive and snorkel in the Red Sea, but Saudi's brought in tourism last year, the last 2 years, so hopefully a lot more people will be able to see what you're describing. That would be pretty cool. Perhaps not the brine pools though. Right, so we've talked about the Red Sea, but what about the research that you guys do, with exploring the Red Sea? How does that have a global impact? Francesca.
So first, I'll tell you a little bit about my research. So
yes,
we really are a mixed team. So in my group, we're biologists and geologists. And the reason for that is that in order to explore and assess and describe and quantify and explain the diversity of habitats and organisms that build those habitats and live in them, we need to start with mapping, with the geomorphology of the substrate. So the composition of the substrate, its inclination, the depth at which it has formed, its stability, have a great deal of importance for the kind of biological communities that live on them. So first, we kind of find out what the shape of the substrate is underwater, and then we characterize the living organisms. We mainly focus on the ones that don't move very much. So my group doesn't study fish. We study all the little creatures that are non-Disney friendly. We don't do Nemos, we do corals, we do whatever is encrusting and builds up, those communities that are called animal forests. And in particular, we focus on corals because corals build topographic reliefs, build structures, but also aggregate diversity of other organisms. And then we dive more into the biological part and we explore the diversity genetically and morphologically. So this descriptive work that fishes in different disciplines from geology to molecular biology is what is called normally fundamental research. And the study of diversity in the marine environment is very important and has global and regional importance, because in the perspective of the great changes, local and global changes in the marine environment and in the quality of the marine environment, it's you know, you might have heard about this, but it's really, really important to manage the resources and act to protect them. Now, it's really, really hard to manage a resource you don't know. You don't know its composition, its position, its location, its abundance, and it's even harder to protect it. So this is kind of the global application of our work. But there is another part, and it's, you know, it draws on why it's interesting to study this in the Red Sea in particular, and, you know, why exploring the Red Sea for this is really important, is that because of the features that Daniele and I described before, the Red Sea is really unique. But these unique environmental conditions that are extreme, Daniele passed me the term, actually have shaped the organisms that live here, for example, the corals, to adapt to conditions that may be reflective of the future conditions all over the world. So hotter, more acidic, or, you know, more saline. This gives us the incredible chance to be able to explore this diversity from an evolutionary point of view. So it's interesting for us to assess which organisms are here, and then in combination with other colleagues that work more on genetics and adaptation, find out which adaptations the Red Sea corals, the Red Sea organisms have developed during their evolution to kind of withstand these very challenging conditions that might be the future condition for other oceans.
Okay, so the Red Sea is almost like a living laboratory.
Correct.
For studying future oceans, because it's got a completely different climate to the oceans that we see right now. And we could even use it for like coral bleaching studies. Corals.
For example, so one of the effects of increased sea surface temperature or seawater temperature is the breakdown of the symbiosis between the corals that are animals looking like rocks, but they're really animals, and their symbionts, which you don't see with your eyes because they're like unique one cell organism that live within the coral. So this very intimate association is highly functional for both partners involved in this relationship. However, if something goes wrong in the quality of the environment, for example, temperature becomes too hot and the threshold is quite small, then there is a temporary breakdown of this relationship, and one of the two partners just leaves. So the, you know, one cell little algae goes back to the water column, and it's fine because, you know, they can adapt. But the coral that has adapted to having this help from this energy help from the zooxanthella, the algae, is left white because it loses, you know, this kind of pigmentation that the algae provides. Their tissue is transparent, and what you see is the white skeleton below. Now, most people think that when a coral is bleached, a coral is dead, and what we see is a skeleton. Actually, bleaching is, you know, something really natural. It's a kind of intermediate phase between healthy and dead. And the recovery of the symbiosis is possible, of the association with the algae is possible, but if the conditions that cause this breakdown persist for too long, then you lead to death. And so corals in the Red Sea seem to be coping pretty well, especially in certain regions, with the bleaching events. I mean, with the factors that lead to a bleaching event. This being said, we also have to say that the massive bleaching events that have happened in the last 2 decades have also affected the reefs in the Red Sea. So yes, the Red Sea is a natural laboratory that could help us understand how to adapt to hotter waters, but it's also a sea that's currently put under a lot of pressure from the global change and increase of global temperature.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. As Daniele put it, pushing the limits of life earlier. I really love that. Daniele, I hope you've forgiven Francesca for saying extreme environments, but tell us, how does your research have global impact?
So, of course, I also use the word extreme, definitely, so no problem at all. Just I wanted to mention that that is extreme for us, but not for those that are living there. But definitely, as a conventional word, we use extreme. So, what is the impact, the global impact? The global impact is at different levels. So if I describe my research, the first purpose of my research is to learn more, to enlarge our knowledge, to see what is existing on our planets in these extreme, as we said, unconventional systems. And this is why we explore the deep sea. As Lloyd said before, the biggest desert on our planet is the deep ocean. There is essentially very few forms of life. Let's say the number of microbial cells in the water is very low respect to the photic layer where light is going to. So we are interested, in my laboratory, we are interested to see and explore where there are these new horizons of life, the concept of oasis. So I love that concept, the oasis, the island. So where you can find conditions that can enhance the life. And there are spots at the bottom in the deep sea where in this huge desert, you can find really spot of life. And these are, for instance, these lakes, brine lakes, where in this narrow layer at the surface of the lake, that is in fact called the lake in the water because it is denser than the upper water column. So the density is very different. And there you can find really an increased number of cells, of microbes, and all the trophic chain that is linked to them, as Lloyd was saying. So this is our interest. So the first purpose, the global impact, we want to say, is to increase our knowledge. And then there is other, more applied impacts that I think are global. For instance, we said that these microbes are extremophiles. So they are adapted to live in this very high salinity, high pressure, absence of oxygen, and so on, high temperature. So their enzymes and their molecules in the cells are unique, are selected for coping with these conditions. So they can be source of metabolites, enzymes, and other molecules that can be used in human-driven processes where the conditions are extremes, for instance, in some industrial processes. And the other futuristic impact can be the one that go beyond our planet. We know now, we've started since tens of years, decades, the explorations of the space. And now we know that possibly, the life is beyond our planet. And so we are exploring, humans are exploring the space for searching new life forms. And actually the first important discovery was the discovery of water outside planet Earth. So it was found on Mars. It was found on the satellite of Jupiter Europa. And there it is estimated that there are in that satellite oceans that are probably saline, very saline. And also on Mars, there are spots where there is water, and probably this water is also somehow saline. So let's say these kind of environments, like the brine pools, are analogues, terrestrial analogues of that ecosystem, so that places. We do not know if yet they are ecosystems. So this means that we can test what can be life forms living there eventually. And also we can test, we can use these environments to test our equipments. Now we know that in Mars there is the lander that is exploring the surface, but where to test the condition analogous to that system? These kind of extreme environments are natural place on the planet where we can test the materials, the resistance of the materials, how they can behave over time in that system. So that is the potential impact of this kind of research.
That's a pretty big impact. Wow. I never thought today we would make that link between the Red Sea and space planets. So that's pretty cool. Lloyd, I see some questions coming in from the audience, but before I answer them, Lloyd, I just wanted to ask you as well for Seymour, the Core Labs in KAUST. How do you have or create a global impact?
Well, KAUST is small, first of all, right? We're a small university that has phenomenal resources, phenomenal location. We have, being situated in Saudi Arabia, we touch half of the Red Sea, whereas on the other side of the Red Sea, there's several countries that split the coastline, but Saudi Arabia has it from top to bottom. So we attract global research, right? We have the Red Sea, come and look at it. So in order to support global quality research, we have to have global quality support structures, right? And because we're small, we really rely heavily on abiding by international accreditations and standards, and developing close partnerships with global research institutions so that we can learn from them, share with their experiences. And we also have something to give, right? We're in a unique environment, and we're doing things differently than other places. So it's we support the global mixing of the tech support, we'll say. I got a pretty funny anecdote from this whole thing. So we seek out organizations and meetings to go to so we can develop these networks. But there was one organization that actually sought us out and asked us to join. And this was the philanthropic ocean research user group. So anyway, this was started by a institution in the States called the Schmidt Ocean Institute, which is started by one of the ex-CEOs of Google. And they asked a number of institutions around the world to join up to become part of this group of basically institutions that are privately funded, or at least not funded by government. So we have no view to what those other institutions are doing. If you were in the United States, you're getting your funding through NSF. There's a single body that has full view of all the work that's going on, so it aims to reduce duplication. That's not so much happening in philanthropic type work. So the story goes, Schmidt was doing some remotely operated vehicle work off the coast of California. And they're looking at hydrothermal vents. The camera on the ROV pans over to this supposedly never before seen geological feature, and there's a pink flamingo. And they zoom in on this pink flamingo, and there's a sign written on it that says, "Been here, done that, Monterey Bay Aquarium." So with that experience, they said, that's it. We have to make a global group of philanthropically minded institutions. So now KAUST, Schmidt, and Barry, as well as OceanX and the Five Deeps project, probably familiar or heard about those two organizations, because already this group of people that we've become associated with has borne fruit. We had the OceanX ship most recently here. We supported that. Francesca supported that by providing a research program in the NEOM area. And before that, we were very proud of supporting the Five Deeps expedition, where Victor Vescavo brought his deep submersible into the Red Sea and managed to reach the deepest part of the Red Sea for the first time, with a young Saudi national on board at the same time, who happens to work for me. So Mohammed, we're very proud of him for being the first Saudi to the bottom.
Excellent, thank you, Lloyd. And there was also the first female as well to the deep sea, Professor Foika, who has been exploring the Red Sea, the land and water of the Red Sea for a few years now. She did part of her PhD in KU, and she's also part of a new research collaboration with JAMSTEC, the Japanese Agency for Marine, Earth, Science and Technology. So yeah, I think there's most definitely a lot more people and organizations that are involved in exploring the Red Sea, and what we've heard from today and what we've listened to today is only just a snapshot. Okay, look, I can see that some of the questions are coming in. The first one is from Giovanna Sabini. Doctors or professors Benzoni and Daffonchio have both spoken about how unique and extreme the Red Sea is, and that the corals living there have adapted and evolved to live in such conditions. Has there been research already into planting Red Sea corals in other reefs worldwide?
I am guessing this one is for me. So it's a tricky, it's a very tricky question, in so that I don't think we should be thinking of exporting corals from the Red Sea outside of the Red Sea. First of all, because we are yet to understand the uniqueness of our corals in terms of species and, you know, their actual connection and connectivity with the same populations, the different populations of the same species or the different species outside of the Red Sea. The short answer is no, it hasn't been done. But the longer answer that I would have to give you is that there are KAUST researchers that are actively looking into projects that study the advantage of using certain populations of Red Sea corals to repopulate Red Sea reefs in case of consistent damage. Now, that skill set can then be applied outside of the Red Sea. That technology, that knowledge, that know-how can then be transferred outside of the Red Sea. I don't think that fragmenting corals or using corals that are from the Red Sea and putting them out would be an ideal plan, because, you know, we might need to learn the ways that corals of the Red Sea adapted to the Red Sea, but we need to use the corals outside of the Red Sea to kind of repopulate the rest of the Indo-Pacific. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, cool. I want to go really fast because I realized that we're running out of time, but KAUST professor Susanna Nunes asked, and I think this one is for Daniele, how sharp is the gradient of salt concentration with the depth in the Red Sea, and how the concentration compares with the concentration in the Dead Sea? So do the organisms live exclusively there, or are some able to adapt to a certain range of salinity? Whoa, what a mouthful. Daniele, can you see it? Or is she putting you under pressure? Is Professor Nunes putting you under pressure as we're going live right now?
Okay, if I understood correctly, the question is if there is a similarity between the organisms in the Red Sea and the Dead Sea in response to salinity. That is correct?
Essentially, yeah.
Essentially, there is the concept of, especially for microbes, of endemism. So the condition of a system is not only dictated by salinity and the extent of salinity, but by many other factors. Let's say, first of all, the salinity can be different, because you can have the same salinity and the same conductivity, for instance, that is a proxy to measure salinity, but you can have a completely different ionic composition. You can have sodium-rich salinity, magnesium-rich salinity, and so on. So already this difference can steer the selection of different microbes. So I'm not an expert of the microbes living in the Dead Sea, but I'm pretty sure that they are a bit or quite different from those that live in system in the Red Sea of comparable salinity. By the way, of course, the Dead Sea is much saltier than the Red Sea, except for the brine pools. The brine pools are comparable. But, you know, the brine pools, for instance, are anaerobic. So are rich in sulfide, so reduced form of sulfur, that have certain toxicity. There is input of hydrocarbons coming from the bottom. So, you know, the overall condition is different at the end, even if they have comparable salinity. due to the difference of the type of salinity and due to the difference of the other environmental parameters, at the end, the outcome of selection is different. So the microbes are probably different. Some of them can be similar, but for sure they will have genome tailored on that conditions. I don't know if I answered to the question, but
I also don't know. I'm not a professor in the Red Sea, but I think you did a pretty good job of it. I think we just have to kind of stop there. I know that there's loads of questions coming through, which I promise my audience members, I will send to the professors, and I see your names and maybe we could answer them afterwards. Just as we're running out of time, I guess it's quite an interesting topic. Just before we go, does anybody want to say anything else? Yes, Francesca.
Perhaps one of the two chatty Italians could slide in the last one in. I think I would just like to kind of bring up briefly the fact that the exploration of the Red Sea we've discussed about today really deals with the scientific and technical exploration. But the exploration of the Red Sea goes also beyond, the science and technology. There is also the cultural exploration. There is the fact that the Red Sea provides livelihood for a number of human populations on its coastline. So studying the uniqueness of the Red Sea and understanding it from a scientific point of view also contributes to improving the livelihoods of these people, especially in a time of change, especially when there are ambitious plans for the change of the coastline. So I think it's a very pertinent time to talk about the exploration of the Red Sea, thinking that this now is receiving a very strong push forward because things are changing fast, and we need to explore more in the shallow and especially in the deep, I would say, because we really are missing the big picture down there. So we have fantastic explorations done by Daniela and colleagues, but it's really a drop in the ocean, and the pun is intended.
Brilliant. And Jeddah is 200 years old as well this year, right? Which we call the gate to the Red Sea.
Yes, we're hitting a very important bicentenary for the kingdom and for Jeddah, because I think it's 200 years since the first mention of Jeddah being the gate, the port of the Red Sea. So again, human history, culture, interconnected with the diversity and the uniqueness of this incredible body of water that again deserves more exploration.
Thank you for those points. And I just want to thank all of you for your time today. I think we'll leave it there. There are most definitely a lot more studies going on in the Red Sea, especially within KAUST. But I do think KAUST is well placed to understand the Red Sea, as you only need to go less than 100 kilometers out to find the deepest part of the Red Sea from KAUST. And for our audience members, if you want to learn more about KAUST research, you can go to discovery.kaust.edu.sa, and you can even sign up for our bi-weekly newsletters. You can revisit old Sci-Cafes where we were in front of live audiences. This is our 1-year anniversary of being on Zoom. I absolutely hate it, but as long as we are disseminating science, that is fantastic. And yeah, thank you to our audience members for listening, and goodbye.